The valve is positioned at an angle in order to allow more room when we bend our lines. We secure the valve with the original nuts, tightening them with the appropriate tools. A fiberglass battery box is supplied with our replica assembly. We have to mark and trim an area for our master cylinder and cut one notch below and to the right of the master cylinder for our steering column. We use a saber saw with the appropriate blade to make these cuts. When our battery box has been properly trimmed, we can install our master cylinder to its metal mounting plate. When necessary, we trim the left mounting flange to clear the frame upright. Two 3/8" diameter by 1 3/4" long bolts with flat washers, lock washers, and nuts are used to secure the master cylinder to the frame. We have obtained a remanufactured unit from our local auto supply store. The new unit was not that expensive. We avoided a core charge by exchanging our original unit at the time of purchase. We always replace any questionable brake components without hesitation. The small expense is well worth the additional safety and peace of mind. For now, we only finger tighten the master cylinder. For our brake and fuel lines, we'll be using brand new tubing that we've obtained from our local auto supply store. Available in various lengths with fittings at each end, this tubing can easily be bent by hand. Before making any bends, we make certain that the fittings are at the ends of the lines. When necessary, we can use a piece of wire or a coat hanger as a template for our bends. We've obtained approximately 15 feet of 3/16" tubing for our brake lines, 10 feet of 5/16" tubing for our fuel line, and 20 feet of 1/4" tubing for both our fuel return line and fuel vent lines. We've also purchased the appropriate connectors. A flaring tool is used for any lines we may wish to shorten. Let's take a moment and review our brake and fuel lines. The original lines connecting the master cylinder to the differential valve were retained. It was necessary to slightly rebend them to conform to the new relationship between the master cylinder and differential valve. Two new lines connect to the differential valve, then run to the front brakes where they are joined to the rubber front brake hoses. The original brackets from our Pinto have been secured to the front of the crossmember on each side. The brake and fuel lines run along the inside of the main frame rail on the driver's side to the rear of the car. We temporarily secure the new lines to the frame with long tie wraps. After all lines are properly located and connected, we will permanently attach them with steel clamps. The rear brake line terminates at the end of the frame rail, just before it kicks up. At this location, we join the brake line to the rubber brake hose from the rear axle. The fuel lines run up and then back along the frame where they bend upward toward the fittings on the gas tank. We've also ordered the old-style gauge set for our new car. The new gas sending unit that comes with the set will bolt right in place through the top opening we've covered with duct tape. Several feet of 5/16" and 1/4" inside diameter rubber fuel hose was obtained from our auto supply store when we picked up our metal fuel lines. At the same time, we picked up some stainless steel clamps of the appropriate sizes. Using a utility knife, we cut a piece of hose for the fuel line and secure it to both the fitting on the gas tank and the end of the metal fuel line. We used a hacksaw to cut the flare off the rear of the line and remove the fitting. We slide the clamps into place and tighten them securely. Next, we repeat the same procedure to secure the fuel return line. The fuel vent line will connect to the fitting on the fuel fitting neck and run to a charcoal canister. We'll take care of that later. It will be attached to the front of the frame on the driver's side. When we have a carburetor that does not have a fuel return outlet, we can connect our vent into the tank return fitting and not use the vent and fitting on the filler neck. The original metal bracket that supports the rear rubber brake hose has been secured to the frame with self-tapping screws. We thread the male fitting at the rear of the metal brake line into the female fitting on the brake hose and tighten it securely. The original retaining clip will hold the rubber hose in place. The motor mount adapter brackets we removed from our Ford have been cleaned and painted. We simply position them in place against the mounting plates on each side of the frame. The holes in the adapter brackets are aligned with the pre-punched holes in the mounting plates, and we insert the bolts. The appropriate tools are used to tighten the bolts. We had the rack and pinion steering assembly thoroughly inspected. All worn parts were replaced. We then painted the entire assembly. Now we place the rack against the front of the crossmember. The original bolts and nuts are used to secure the assembly to the chassis. Normally, we insert the bolts from the rear and install the nuts on the front against the rack. In order to film this assembly, we are doing it in the opposite manner. However, we will simply turn the bolts around so they go through the crossmember from the rear. Later, we will use a torque wrench to tighten the bolts to factory specifications. Strut brackets come with the assembly kit. We simply place the brackets into position against the inside of the frame rails on each side of the chassis. Here we deviate slightly from the instruction manual and use 4 7/16" diameter by 3" long bolts, passing them through the holes in the frame and strut brackets. The appropriate flat washers, lock washers, and nuts are used to secure the bolts. In this case, for appearance, we have installed the nuts on the inside. If we wanted, we could use lock nuts instead of lock washers. Moving to the driver's side of the passenger compartment, we next install our brake pedal. Because Ford used a number of different types of brake pedals, we find several different mounting holes in the frame bracket. After selecting the proper location, we position the hole in the master cylinder push rod over the stud on the brake pedal. The original Ford bolt is inserted from the passenger's side and secured with the nut. The brake light switch can now be installed along with the retaining clip. We tighten all bolts securely and test the assembly for free movement. If it is necessary to modify the pedal for comfort, we'll do it after our seats have been installed. A steel bracket designed to support the steering column comes with the Ford MG TD Replica assembly kit. Attaching the bracket to the chassis is an easy task. After the holes in the bracket are aligned with the holes in the frame mount, 3/8" diameter by 1.5" long bolts with flat washers, lock washers, and nuts are installed and securely tightened. Once our bracket has been bolted to the frame, we can install our steering column. The steering shaft passes through the hole in the bracket, and the column supports are placed under the holes in the mounting bracket. Four 3/8-inch diameter by 1 1/4-inch long bolts, along with flat washers, lock washers, and nuts, are used to secure the column to the bracket. Earlier, when we cleaned and painted our column, we cut 3 inches off the tip of the steering shaft using a hacksaw. Moving to the front of our chassis, we are now ready to install the engine and transmission. Here we have a type of engine lift that can be rented from most rental stores. Also, we will be using a hydraulic floor jack for this procedure. We've securely fastened a chain to the front and rear of the engine, making certain that the chain is of sufficient strength to support the weight. Many engines will have engine lifting hooks. These are really L-shaped brackets with holes through them. A chain is passed through the holes, or a hook is attached. Either way, the important thing is to have a chain of sufficient diameter and strength to support the engine. Slowly we push it to the rear, guiding the transmission under the battery box. This is not a difficult job. While having someone to assist us would be helpful, it is really not necessary. A little patience is all that's required. Although this is the most convenient type of engine hoist to use, there are other types which work just as well. We can use whatever is available, just so it's sturdy and intended for the job. We want to engage the motor mounts attached to each side of the engine to the forward through bolts that will pass through the holes in the engine adapter brackets we bolted to the chassis earlier. We use our floor jack to elevate the transmission at the rear. Prior to purchasing our donor car, we had the engine completely inspected, and any questionable parts have been replaced. A remanufactured alternator has been bolted to the engine. All of the electrical components have been checked. The engine has been completely cleaned, then repainted with the original factory colors we purchased from our auto supply store in convenient spray cans. We are quite confident that the engine will run as well as it did when it was new. The carburetor has been covered to prevent dirt from entering. When the engine has been positioned properly, the through bolts are inserted and the nuts are attached.